Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are, the thing that the defensive backs do, the seatbelt gesture thing. We are buckling our seatbelts here. Does it go this way? Maybe it goes this way. We are buckling our seatbelts for what is going to be a very busy next few days as the transfer portal officially opens here today. We're going to talk about what seems to be the universal belief of Georgia's biggest need in the portal, and we'll address how they might be able to meet that need. But we are also on guard for the possibility that guys could be leaving Georgia as well. In fact, as we start things here today, there is some breaking news on that, and we were joking about this on Monday when I got to read the highlights a la the SportsCenter anchor. Anytime we get to sort of play newsman, anchor chair, I'm always pretty happy about that. So today, in true Ron Burgundy fashion, we'll be bringing you – I always have to pop my papers to do this. We'll be bringing you breaking news as it comes in related to anything in the transfer portal. We got two great guests today, too. Thrilled to welcome back the terrific Davin Bellamy to the show. Davin has been furthering his football career the last few weeks, but he's really eager to be on our show, too. So the schedule's finally kind of lined up. We'll bring on the great former Georgia linebacker here today. Mike Griffith stops by for a few minutes today, too. And one of the things I want to do with Mike is something we really have not done enough of lately, which is honestly sort of shout out the Diamond Dawgs for another big win last night, a great series win against Arkansas this past weekend. So we will do some of that when Mike Griffith is on for a couple of minutes here today. But it's transfer portal stuff off the top. So what do you say we get to? Oh, yeah, and by the way, looks like Georgia may also have made a staff hire here too. So we'll kind of touch on that. Plus the future of G-Day will be mentioned. So a lot to do. Glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We begin with breaking news. This is one of those things where you have that big sound effect, dong. And by the time many of you hear or watch this show, this won't be quite so breaking for you, but this literally happening within the last couple of moments as we come on the air here today. Transfer portal is officially open. A lot to say about that, but we start with the fact that we know that Georgia is likely to lose at least one or two guys off the roster. And from a numeric standpoint, understanding you got to get down to, we think, 105 players in total on your roster by the time the season kicks off. Georgia probably just needs to lose a couple to be compliant with that rule once it officially takes effect, assuming that it does, which is probably more confusing than it needs to be. But we now know one of the names from Georgia in the transfer portal. It is running back Branson Robinson. And this is one of those things, and if you get a little age on you, you just have a lot of this as a college football fan. We will always wonder what would have been when it comes to Branson Robinson. As a recruit, he was about as popular as just about anybody could be. And a lot of that is because he just sort of reminded people of Nick Chubb. Body type, dominating at his high school level in Mississippi, just really came into Georgia, not like hype or, it wasn't anything negative. It was just Georgia fans just really liked Branson Robinson. They just really liked, to use an old-timey phrase, they liked the cut of his jib. They just sort of thought that Robinson sort of looked like a very buttoned-up and professional-looking football player. And I honestly believe he could have been that here at Georgia. I hope that he'll be that somewhere else. I like Branson Robinson, but he's been hurt and he's been injured. And sometimes those injury situations create a little bit of a murky picture. So if Branson does stay at Georgia here this year, if I'm being honest, I don't know how much Robinson can be counted on to contribute right now. Maybe he could have been counted on to do a lot, but I can't say that with certainty because, listen, one of the roles that we fill around here is we just sort of put our ear to the ground when it comes to rumor mill, things like that. You hear me say a lot, the people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Well, those folks that have all those, whispers and rumors and innuendo, y'all, it's been radio silent on Robinson here right now. And, sometimes no news is not necessarily bad news, but as I say, good news has a tendency to leak. Good news has a tendency to break. And bad news oftentimes becomes the dog that doesn't bark. and it's just been really quiet around Robinson here right now. So maybe this shouldn't necessarily be all that unsurprising, but I will go to my grave, hopefully many decades from now, but I'll go to my grave believing that without the injuries, Branson Robinson could have been a very good player at Georgia, as the sort of late stage of the 2022 national championship game would have led you to believe was a possibility. So as this stuff comes out, we'll talk about it. Now, I have instructed our excellent staff. We have a great crew helping us here today. Kaylee Manziel, our buddy Danny, Jack Leo is here today. So we have an expert staff on hand. I've instructed them to make sure I become aware if more news like this becomes available. And I've also instructed them to be very careful to make sure I don't read any fake tweets on the air, because we are also in fake tweet season. And we are going on 10 years of doing DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. I think we've only read one fake tweet on the air. In the entire decade of our existence, I believe we've only read one fake tweet on the air. And I'd like to sort of keep it that way, so let's be really, really careful here that we don't give any erroneous information. Now, bad takes, there'll be plenty of those. Erroneous, information, poorly sourced facts, hopefully not quite as much of that. All right, so we'll do more of this as it kind of comes in here in a little bit. Let's begin, though, with where Georgia might look to do some shopping. And this is the part that's fun about the transfer portal. It does open officially today. Now, we've had transfer news the last few days, so all of this that feels like a rule is actually probably merely just a suggestion. But the fun part of the transfer portal is, hey, who might my team get? Who might we add here? And it does seem like there's a fairly universal consensus about what the overall top need for Georgia might be. In fact, I saw Chris Hummer writing at CBS Sports looking at the top need for all 10 of the preseason top 10 teams as listed at CBS Sports. And what Hummer put on their website is basically already the thing I think you already know, that Georgia probably, whether you think of it as a defensive end or you think of it as an outside linebacker, or you want to use the more modern phrasing of edge rusher, Georgia probably needs something to go along here on the outside edge of its defense right now. And the kind of player that Georgia would bring in, because we're going to talk about a little bit of a different version of this in a moment, of someone who may just come in with a veteran presence to contribute to depth. The sense that I get is if Georgia could add the edge rusher, this isn't necessarily like seasoning on the entree. This might actually be a little bit of a main course in itself, that Georgia might be looking for the kind of edge rusher type guy they can put on the field. After all, Damon Wilson transfers to Missouri. Chaz Chambliss is no longer here. I think Georgia likes Q Johnson a lot, but you probably still need more than one. Let me show you what Hummer writes at CBSSports.com about this. He says that Georgia will likely take some depth pieces at quarterback and running back if they make sense, but the big position of need is edge. The Bulldogs were dealt a blow late in the winter cycle when Damon Wilson, the number 2 overall player in the 24/7 Sports Portal rankings, transferred to Missouri. Hummer says there just isn't a lot of experienced depth for Georgia at outside linebacker. The Bulldogs will be aggressive if the right player pops up to address that need. And what the national writer says here, and sometimes the national media gets it wrong as it relates to Georgia, in this particular case, I believe we would say, yeah, that's pretty much right. That you could read CBS or ESPN or On3 or any of these sort of big national websites. They're all fairly easily going to zero in on this because everybody sort of knows the story with Georgia. A lot of depth at a lot of places, probably not quite so much at outside linebacker for all the reasons that Hummer mentions. Now, Hummer also mentions a couple of other positions for Georgia, too. And that's where we turn kind of the local source here at DawgNation.com. I thought my colleague, Connor Riley, who had obviously joined us on the show yesterday, I thought he had a very good story about Georgia's transfer portal needs in addition to edge rusher. And just like 24/7 and CBS Sports, he said, yeah, edge rusher, outside linebacker, maybe defensive end, but that sort of edge rushing spot, biggest need overall. But Connor also went into a little bit more depth, too, about what Hummer had mentioned about, well, maybe you think running back, maybe you think something in the quarterback category. Connor got into more detail on that. Let me read this at DawgNation.com. Connor writing that running back is another position where Georgia could look to make an addition. He says the Bulldogs feel very good about Nate Frazier, but they lack a proven number 2 running back. Georgia would be looking for someone to complement Frazier rather than be the bell cow running back. Do you get what the point that he's making there? Georgia's not maybe looking to bring in, we'll talk later on today about like a Jaden Ott or someone like that. That Georgia's looking to bring in someone who would go along with what Frazier, we believe, can provide based on a successful freshman season. More about that depth piece. Now, let me pause on this for a moment. I'm going to read the rest of this. You know, the Branson Robinson news, and listen, I am not going to celebrate that news, and I am not going to certainly, say a bad word about Robinson on the way out the door at all, because I'm a huge Branson Robinson fan, as most of you are. But as one of our commenters on our chat video said a couple of minutes ago, sometimes these sort of transfer new pieces of news are revealing in that for a guy trying to work his way back to health and trying to figure out, kind of what his next step is, maybe Branson Robinson believes the Bo Walker rumors as much as anybody, and the belief that Walker could be a player who's ready to play. And maybe the flashes that we saw from Chauncey Bowens on G-Day, maybe someone inside the program, kind of saw some of that replicated during spring practice too. Sometimes when a player leaves, it's a statement about the other players that are perhaps in that position group. Maybe that's the case. Even if it is, though, I think that Connor is likely right, is that Georgia would still maybe consider adding a veteran presence at the running back position, and the loss of Branson Robinson now maybe makes that even more true than it already was. Let me read more to you here at DawgNation.com because I think this is important. Connor says that quarterback could also be a position to monitor. Georgia has 4 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, but only Gunnar Stockton has thrown a collegiate pass attempt. Stockton, who's in his 4th year in the program, overwhelming favorite to be the Georgia starting quarterback. But if the Bulldogs were to kick the tires on a portal quarterback, they would want someone who could be comfortable not starting, that possesses a veteran experience. The list of those players isn't particularly long, and he obviously points out that all of this is going to remain open until April 25th. So the way that I've said this, and I believe I may have even said this on yesterday's show, if Georgia adds a quarterback right now, I think the template for who they might add would be a little bit like what they added a year ago when they brought in Jaden Rashada. And I think that the Rashada news was treated differently than the actual facts of the matter. Rashada's pretty famous. He was the guy involved in the lawsuit with Florida, former kind of NIL bonus baby as a recruit. But as a actual hot commodity on the football field a year ago, and I'm just being honest, I'm not in any way trying to tarnish him, but as a hot commodity on the football field a year ago, I don't know how much there was of that for Jaden Rashada. Rashada had started some games at Arizona State, so he would have had the kind of prerequisite experience that Connor says Georgia needs, and we believe is probably the case. But Rashada was also not going to start had he stayed at Arizona State. And I don't know how many places around college football a year ago that Jaden Rashada would have started at had he gone to, or even had a chance to really start at. So Rashada, I think, to his credit, wisely came to Georgia a year ago for the chance to develop, a chance to learn, and see if he had a chance to maybe one day become the starting quarterback here. Now, like a lot of quarterbacks, he also maybe got a little bit impatient at the end of that and decided his best spot was somewhere else, and he has every right to make that decision for himself. But Rashada was, a year ago, a player who knew he wasn't going to start but did have some experience. So if there is a player like Jaden Rashada again this year, that's, I believe, what Georgia might go after. And maybe it's a name like Rashada a year ago, famous enough that we've heard of him, or maybe it's a player that's a little bit more of an unknown. But I do believe the experience without the expectation to start that probably defined Jaden Rashada a year ago, I do believe that's probably what Georgia is looking for here right now. And by the way, that's not because Georgia knows matter-of-factly that Gunnar Stockton's going to be the greatest quarterback in college football. We don't know that about anybody. You can't make that sort of certainty. But Georgia has invested the sort of time and treasure into Stockton that this is clearly who they're hitching their wagon to right now. In other words, you don't put this much time, this much effort into getting a guy ready to go if that's not your guy. That Georgia says, based on what we've seen from him in 6 quarters of postseason, plus the fact that he's been here and knowledgeable of our system, and we sort of trust this guy not to flake out on us, the way that some quarterbacks sometimes do, that this is just simply how Georgia's going to go about its attack here for this upcoming season. Which sort of brings me to this when it comes to whoever Georgia might bring in. backup quarterback, depth at running back, starting edge rusher, or guy who would be expected to play a lot. What is Georgia looking from more so than just the athletic credentials of these particular players? What's Georgia looking for on this? And I think when you go back to the phrasing that Kirby Smart kind of hammered home over and over again in his post-game press conference after G-Day on Saturday, that notion of fire, passion, energy. We said before that leaders are repeaters, and it shouldn't be taken as reductive that Smart just kept regurgitating that same phrase over and over. He wasn't doing that just to, filibuster and run out the clock, although maybe sometimes in press conferences there's some of that. That we do think that emphatic restating of that over and over was about casting the proper vision for his team. And you would assume that any transfer player that Georgia looks to bring in also will need to have that same fire, passion, and energy. So for some context on that, let me let you hear Kirby Smart kind of saying how they evaluate how they're doing in the sort of fire, passion, and energy department. And I would assume this also kind of counts for the transfer players too. This is Kirby Smart.
I don't think I look at it and I could say, okay, there's 11 positions starting out there on defense. How many have a burning fire within them? I don't know, 5, 6, 7. I mean, it's not what I want it to be. And then offense, okay, I'm looking, and we talked about it the other day, I'm looking for a bonfire. I'm looking for not a bunch of little campfires. I'm looking for a bonfire. I'm looking to see an inferno of burning. Like, I have to be dominant, and the best teams have offenses and defenses that have passion and energy. And I can't sit here and tell you that I'm happy with where ours is, but I'm also not disappointed. I just want to get more guys jumping in there.
When we talked about this the other day, the idea of the bonfire, things like that, I was talking about that song, Pass It On, it only takes a spark to get a fire going. And so help me, people had no idea what I was talking about. Like, some of y'all did not go to vacation Bible school when you're kids, and it shows, man. It shows. Y'all don't know you're pass it on. That's what, for whatever reason, that's what that statement from Kirby Smart sort of reminds me of a bit. But either way, if Georgia brings in a transfer player, the kind of transfer player they're going to bring in, I don't mean this flippantly. I mean this, matter-of-factly, that they want someone that kind of contributes to that overall bonfire of people who want to kind of play the game the right way for the right reasons. And along those lines, I thought that our guy Christian Miller, who we're big fans of, and by the way, Miller a year ago was one of those players who maybe was perhaps shopping his options too. In fact, we kind of know that he was. But a year later, being a part of the bonfire, kind of showing the fire, passion, and energy, it seems like he's exactly where he needs to be on that. So as evidence that what Smart is saying is not just lip service, that the players are being challenged to be more this way, let me read you this on the screen from Miller on X the other day, who said, "To all my young fellas out there, don't get lost in that money. Keep on falling in love with the game, because there's so many more opportunities this game can bring you and your family. You have a growth mindset. The things we want is always going to be there. Run your own race." That sounds like fire, passion, and energy for me. That sounds like a guy who's, happy to get the NIL money, but about more than just the money, as Kirby Smart has said he wants all of his players to be. So if Georgia brings in a transfer, we believe it probably will bring in at least one, then whoever they bring in better understand that. They better get the overall mission. And my guess is that Georgia's doing a lot of due diligence in making sure the only players they're considering are those types of players. Now, one more thing here before we change the subject. So we already know Branson Robinson in the transfer portal. We expect that Georgia perhaps needs to, from a roster management standpoint, and just certainly could lose even more than that. Hopefully not too many, and hopefully not any surprises, although you never know. But certainly on guard here for what could also be on its way out the door at Georgia. Now, the one thing we know is that those players can't transfer to another SEC school, which theoretically limits the options of where, Georgia players can go. But as Kirby Smart said on Saturday with this portal opening, all that does is create a little bit more shark-like behavior from the other leagues who are now circling around Georgia and the rest of the SEC, trying to get the sort of SEC talent they don't have in their own conferences. Here is Kirby Smart on that.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, they can go anywhere, right? They just can't go in the SEC, but there's nobody that loves that rule more than the teams outside the SEC. I mean, they love that rule. But that's again, if kids want to be here, we're going to have them here. I hope I get to keep my entire roster and go play the whole year with my entire roster. If we don't, then we'll get somebody that wants to. I mean, there's tons of kids that want to be at the University of Georgia, and I'm worried about the ones that want to be here, not the ones that don't.
I think that's the only choice you can make, and I think that Smart's serious when he says it that way. We're going to be kind of buckled up here for a while the next few days. There'll be rumors of players that Georgia might add. Some of them they may get, some of them may not. There'll be rumors of players that Georgia might lose. Some of these expected. It's also possible that some of these might not quite be so expected. But ultimately, Kirby Smart says we're going to put a roster together of guys who do want to play with fire, passion, and energy, who do want to be here, who want to play the game the right way for the right reasons. And honestly, I kind of trust Georgia on that. They seem to sort of figure out the intangible part of this in a way that not every program does. Programs that lead with money end up attracting players who kind of only play for the money. And we have seen the last few days sort of what it looks like when something like that occurs. Georgia is about more than that. And I don't think that Georgia is going to lessen its standard during this portion of the transfer portal season. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Now, we are not in the transfer portal. We're not going anywhere. We do a DawgNation cruise next week, so not quite not going anywhere, but we'll certainly be here for a long time, as long as they'll have us. And as long as we've got great sponsors like our friends at Breda Pest Management, well, our position is pretty secure. And by the way, if you want some security in your own life, Breda Pest Management can provide that for you too. Because it is sort of that time of year in which people kind of think about their homes. And, you know, I think the most important things you can think about when it comes to protecting your home is termites. In Georgia, termites are a reality. You already know that. That's why you've got a termite company that shows up and they do whatever it is they do. But if you're like me, sometimes you look around, and I've heard my neighbor say this, that, you know, it feels like the quality of service I'm getting is just going down. They don't come inside your house. They, you know, who knows what they do? They just sort of, you know, give you that little sticker and stick it on the door. Hey, we were here. Yeah, but what did you do? Did you give me a high level of service? I don't know. I mean, you know, what sort of level of service should I demand? Well, I would say this is where our friends at Breda Pest Management become really important, because they've been in business since 1975. And you don't last that long unless you are consistently delivering a dependably high level of service. With 125 employees stretched all over our market, of course, that's what they're doing. So much so that they've been recognized, and you can say this along with me, as the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So, you know, transfer portal is open for players. Transfer portal is open for you. It's time to make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, your bug, your critter needs. You got mosquitoes in the yard, all kinds of stuff like that. It's time for you to make the switch. And here's the good news. When you make the switch, not only is the quality of service you're going to receive going to go up, but the price you pay for that is going to go down. Listen, there is something going on with the economy now all the time. It's just never ending. And frankly, I try to block a lot of that stuff out. However, when you can save money, you should. When you can put more money back in your pocket, you owe it to yourself to do so. That's why making the switch to Breda Pest Management is so important. Find them online. BredaPest.com. B-R-E-D-A. BredaPest.com. One more time. B-R-E-D-A. BredaPest.com, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. I am thrilled today because before we're done, it is a triumphant return for the great former Georgia linebacker Davin Bellamy, who's back in the UFL again, playing for the D.C. Defenders. We're going to talk to him about all of that. Davin has some really interesting stuff to say about that. He's going to weigh in on kind of what's next for Georgia after G-Day. Man, I am so excited about having Davin Bellamy back on the show again. Davin has been very busy, but he loves being on there and talking to you. So we're going to give him his opportunity to kind of do that, and your opportunity to hear from him, that coming up. Mike Griffith also going to pop by here in a moment. I'll ask him more about the Branson Robinson situation. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Let me hit two stories here real quick, and then we'll kind of move on with all the transfer portal stuff. There is reporting out there, speaking of, we mentioned 24/7 Sports a little earlier in CBS, Matt Zennett's good reporter. It sounds like Georgia is making a staff hire. We've seen a couple of these lately. You know, the OL coach from the Jaguars or whatever, John Lilly, who people know. It seems like, you know, those were ads that Georgia recently made. And now Jimmy Brumbaugh, it sounds like, too. Matt Zennett's, who I trust, says that Georgia is expected to hire veteran defensive line coach Jimmy Brumbaugh. Now, let me say this. The only thing I really know about Brumbaugh is he had like a weird dust-up with Jeremy Pruitt a couple of years ago. Obviously, he's been around for 1,000 years, but that's like the one prominent thing I know about him. He was an all-SEC defensive lineman at Auburn, and he's coached Auburn, Tennessee, Colorado, Maryland, Kentucky, most recently at Coastal Carolina. The point of all of this is this. As a general rule, I really like analysts. I really like the sort of quality control support staff. And one of the reasons I do is because there are a lot of things in college football that are kind of mandated by rules. You know, historically, you've only been able to have 10 on-field coaches, although that's sort of slightly changed recently. You know, historically, you've only been able to have 85 scholarship players, although that's kind of changed a little bit too. In other words, there's a cap on how many coaches you can have, how many players you can have. But the analyst world is one of those things where if you're a really aggressive program that wants to be fully committed to winning, there's a great chance to provide a value add in that kind of support staff role. And for a lot of y'all who are very plugged into Georgia, you know how valuable a lot of these Georgia support staff guys have become. Some of them really famous like Buster Faulkner, Montgomery Van Gorder, some of them less so. But a lot of people will tell you, hey, it's the sort of guy behind the guy helping the position coach that sometimes becomes really important. And, you know, we played audio yesterday, audio and video, of Kirby Smart talking about the challenge facing the Georgia offensive and defensive line this year. They need to be better, but they're also losing a lot of snaps from guys who played a lot. And it sort of seems like to me, and maybe I'm like searching too hard for a narrative here, maybe I'm trying to establish a theme that doesn't fully exist. When you think about bringing in like veteran defensive line coach who's literally coached everywhere, you know, offensive line coach who's been in the NFL, John Lilly, who people liked when he was at Georgia before, now he's back again. I mean, you can sort of spin this as sort of back to the basics a little bit. You can sort of spin this as, hey, we're just bringing in some teachers, some, you know, sort of gruff football lifers who you know, they know the game, they know how to teach the game, they know how to get, you know, technique improvements, things like that. I don't know how real that narrative is. I think it's fairly easy to write the storyline. But either way, one of the things I think that Georgia and all the best teams have always used is take advantage of the fact that you have fairly wide, you know, levels of freedom for how you choose to use your support staff and how big you want that support staff to be. Now, there's also the sort of clown show thing where like Florida a couple of years ago in Billy Napier's first year had more golf shirts around their team picture. They had actual players. That's probably a little much. But I do think there's an opportunity to make your team better through the support staff role. And I think that Georgia's been pretty good about that. And, you know, Jimmy Brumbaugh, this may be the last time, probably will be the last time we ever mention him on the show, I'm guessing. But to bring in a guy who's been a defensive line coach like 50 different places and having a chance to sort of bring that teaching style and technique of the Georgia defensive line, I don't think it's a bad thing. Probably not at all. What might be a little bit of a bad thing, though, is, and I've been asked this now a couple of times, we've talked about this plenty, I just can't be quite so sure that 2025 wasn't the last G-Day we're ever going to see. I love G-Day. I'll miss it if it's gone. And I certainly don't want to, you know, write its obituary too early. But boy, you wonder, don't you? I mean, it seems like this is sort of the classic example of what you sometimes see in life, kind of managed decline. You know, marketing works. If you promote something, people become more aware. But sometimes reverse marketing also sort of works too, that if you want people to forget about something, you can just stop talking about it or talk about it in a confusing fashion and people just sort of tune it out. It seems like there might be a little bit reverse marketing going on when it comes to some of the spring game stuff. After Saturday's G-Day, Smart was asked directly, you know, how about future years on G-Day? And Smart, perhaps unsurprisingly based on previous statements, was not willing to commit.
I don't know. I would say it's year by year. You know, it probably has more to do with my team, the health of our team, the number of players in college football. I mean, we as coaches don't control the numbers we have. So if we don't have enough numbers, we won't be able to have the game. So, I mean, I think it's a great tradition, but it's more about what does our team need than just what Athens needs.
So there you go. Not exactly a ringing endorsement for the future of G-Day. I guess we'll find out in the years to come. That is Run the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, I can give you a ringing endorsement from my friends at Georgia Farm Bureau because when it comes to something that, like, legally you have to have, you know, if you're driving a vehicle, you got to have auto insurance. And home insurance is one of those things you have to have, too. And when you have, like, storms, things like that, you're reminded of how important that home insurance is. And you want to make the right decision for the insurance company that you work with, and you're kind of wondering, well, how do I choose? There's so many, and they've all got, you know, ads and things like that. How do I choose the right one? Here is why I like Georgia Farm Bureau, because they're Georgians. They're people living and going to work and just doing life in communities just like yours all across the great state of Georgia. I mean, you pick up the phone, you talk to them. It's friendly people. It's people who understand your point of view. They understand your place in the world because their place in the world is very similar to yours. And so if you want somebody that cares about you, it's always nice to choose someone who's living a life very similar to the one that you're living. And that's what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about. We say it all the time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So when you give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. And when you find them online, gfbinsurance.com, I think you'll make the right choice. And you'll choose them for all your insurance and financial services needs. So find them online. It's gfbinsurance.com. Great to have Georgia Farm Bureau as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. All right, we are busy, jam-packed. That means Davin Bellamy later on. But for now, one of the things I want to get into with Mike here in a minute, we haven't talked enough Diamond Dawgs last couple of days. Georgia stays hot again last night. We'll do that and more here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Mike, as I mentioned, I want to get into the Diamond Dawg stuff with you for a minute because I know you enjoy covering that team. We did have late breaking news just as we came on the air here today, so let me take a moment to say this. Probably expecting Georgia to lose at least a couple of guys. You know, by rule, I think we believe that Georgia has to be down to 105 players by the time the season kicks off. That means you probably need some attrition during this open portal window. Fan favorite, though, who's battled injury, first name we heard from, and that's the running back Branson Robinson. I'll always believe that Robinson's going to be a really good football player. And in my lifetime, and I've now lived long enough to have a lot of these, sometimes it just doesn't happen because of injury, and you'll always be left to wonder what might have been. But I will forever think that Robinson was a pretty special player coming out of high school, and if he can get healthy, and I hope that he can be a really good player somewhere else. But sometimes injuries, and in this case multiple injuries, sometimes they're just sort of slow to heal, and it creates a tough situation. So maybe not the most surprising news based on how quiet it was during the spring that Branson Robinson, one of the Dogs, who's going to look around and try to find a home elsewhere.
Yeah, he's pretty much just taken up a roster spot and not done much with the injuries. And I think Georgia will probably add a running back in the portal. So that's what it tells me. It is unfortunate. You know, Georgia invested a lot into recruiting the guy. There were a lot of high hopes, but you mentioned the injuries, tried to come back, got re-injured. It's a business transaction. I mean, it's all a business transaction. You know, I heard you talking about the G-Day game, and if there's a second portal window, it's hard to have spring games. If there's roster limitations, it's hard to have spring games as we know them. You know, we've heard some speculation on teams playing one another, and last year they kind of held up the stop sign because it came late. Maybe next year you might see some of that because all the schools will have an opportunity to schedule spring games. Talking to people that are a part of the NCAA, you know, that looks like that could happen next year. So as you said, though, G-Day as we know it, you know, could be done. There weren't a lot of people there. It wasn't marketed very much. But still, the spring attendance was down all over. There's a little apathy setting in with this free agent movement and college football trying to find itself with this House versus NCAA ruling, Brandon. They need to get these rules in place because they're losing their audience.
So let me talk about spring game here for a moment because I think I'm different than a lot of people and perhaps different than some people would have expected. I think that Kirby Smart, I was out of town last week, but I believe at one point in time, Smart in a radio interview may have been somewhat open to the idea that, hey, maybe one day we would have preseason football games. I am completely against that totally. If you gave me the choice of a G-Day that's either free to attend or, as it was this year, $10 to attend, your team playing itself, or this pretend make-believe, obviously not real football, like the NFL preseason games. I'm not that big of an NFL fan, but I know plenty of people who are NFL season ticket holders. I mean, it's essentially usury, the way in which NFL season ticket holders are forced to pay full freight for preseason games that have zero resale value. They are literally, you know, held over a barrel to buy something that has no actual value. That is not what I want college football to be. So if spring games go away, I'd rather have nothing than make-believe preseason games. My choice would be G-Day over Georgia playing Fran Brown in Syracuse. It just would be. Not a fan of preseason at all. I think that is highway robbery to fans in the NFL. And if it came to college football, I believe that'd be a step in the wrong direction. What do you think?
Well, you've doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down on that sentiment. You said it for a long time how much you don't like it. It's interesting, and I get it. I understand why. I mean, it was nice to see the depth chart. It was nice to see young guys step up and try to identify who might be the next star and how much progress, they made. I mean, how great was it to see Jaden Riddell make this catch and run around the end and go, oh my goodness, this guy's got some juice. We may not have seen him yet, but we saw him in the scrimmage. What I thought, a couple things interesting. A couple years ago, well, actually 3 or 4 years ago, before Coach Dooley passed, I actually talked to him about this concept, and he actually recommended it to Roy Kramer in the 1990s. So Vince Dooley kind of wanted this game. The way Kirby said he wanted it, though, Brandon, may influence your decision a little bit. He doesn't just want the dog and pony show in terms of the scrimmage. He wants to go and practice with another team for 2 or 3 days, like the NFL, because with the reduced roster, you can't get as much work in a G-Day game as you normally could. You don't have 130 bodies. You got 100. You can't risk injury. The depth isn't the same. At least it'll be 105 if this new proposal goes through. So what Kirby wants to do is go and spend some time with another staff coach that he trusts. Let the teams work together for a couple days leading into an exhibition. The reason why it makes sense now is because it can be monetized. And as college football looks to raise more money for the assistant coaches in golf shirts around the field, or the lobster that they serve the kids in the football building, or the next holdout that wants another $200,000 the day before the spring game, or Nico's case, $2 million more. It's all about pay coaches, extensions. I mean, my goodness, coaches renegotiate their contracts all the time, and no one says anything about that. A player does it, and he's vilified. Quite a difference there. But the bottom line is they're trying to get more money, and they see something that they can monetize to bring interest. That money doesn't just go for football. Remember, they have to pay for other sports out of the money that football makes. So the way Kirby brought it up was this could help pay for some of the Olympic sports that aren't revenue sports, right? Your gymnastics, self-sustaining, softball, track, golf, swimming. So in general, it's a way for athletic departments to generate more revenue by having a televised game, or a game that, the lunatic fringe would watch, if not the true natural fan. So I think that's kind of where it stems from. And it sounds like it's something they're going to take a really long look at. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if you saw that approved based on the information that I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a Georgia fan, I love supporting Georgia, but I think if Georgia or anybody else ever tried to sell sort of a full freight ticket to watch a preseason game, I honestly think fans would be wise not to spend that money. I really do.
But would it be television money? That's my question. Would it be fan money, or are they talking about enhancing a television contract, or a pay event, maybe?
So we don't have time to get into this as much as I'd fully like to, but at some point in time, I do think that part of the reason that spring games are going away, I believe, is because over the course of the last few years, the rights holder that dominates this in the SEC, ESPN, and their family of networks, they've essentially rejected the spring games anyway. Now, they clearly don't want to pay for it. They won't pay for a ninth conference game, so they're obviously not paying for spring games. But if you look at the way in which the footprint of media coverage from the major rights holder has just gotten smaller and smaller each year, honestly, that does not make any sense to me. So few of these were on television. Almost all of it went to streaming video. The overall quality of the broadcast, not the broadcasters themselves, but the broadcast, just the number of cameras, the number of, people there to kind of, put the broadcast together, it kept getting smaller. I mean, college football is the second most popular sport in America. College football has like twice the interest of the NBA, but somehow the NBA generates like twice the TV revenue. I will never, and this is a soapbox and it's not a topic for today, I will never understand why the appetite for ESPN, that controls all of this, at least in terms of the SEC and a huge portion of college ball overall, why the appetite for them when it comes to spring football isn't greater, just given the fact it's even though we're not in the football season, it's way more popular than whatever they could put on TV during that time. So part of the reason why there is no spring game is because ESPN said we'd rather televise tiddlywinks or whatever it is they're putting on TV.
Isn't that crazy? I'm with you on it, BA. I wish we could solve it all in one day or make it make sense, but I agree with you. I think spring football games are exciting and fun, and some people just don't get it. Unfortunately, college football, the earth is kind of shifting under our feet right now. And, we're having to really reevaluate everything, how teams recruit. Remember bringing kids in and flying families in and whining and dining. Well, you really don't want to spend that money now, because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how much you offer. So you're going to see recruiting change and how schools covet kids. And yes, relationship matters, but unfortunately, at the end of the day, you still have to pay the freight, as you would say, and you got to sign the contract. So how do we revolutionize recruiting and how you spend money on your recruiting budget now? Do you save some of that money for the contract? And then the other thing, which I had a former NFL coach and a former college player, current NFL coach, former college player, tell me yesterday, I thought this was really good. Why doesn't the NCAA have the ability to enforce rules across the board? I mean, we look at it right now and we say, well, if Georgia punishes these kids for speeding, they might get in the portal. Well, don't make Georgia responsible. Have the NCAA responsible for penalty like they do in the NFL. That way you say to the kid, look, I wasn't the one that suspended you for 3 games for going 106 miles an hour. The NCAA did. And if the kid goes, I'm going to go in the portal, well, guess what? That 3-game suspension is going with you. This is what's changed. And it sounds like, and you're thinking to yourself, Mike, you're turning this into the NFL. And I'm going, Brandon, they're turning it into the NFL. There's a reason why the NFL manages and leverages like this, because they protect the brand. It would also take a lot of these schools off the hook. So obviously a lot going on right now with the rule changes. I'm sorry, you asked me about the Diamond Dawgs. I got to tell you, the most exciting game, maybe most important regular season win I've ever seen took place Sunday when they rallied from behind in extra innings to beat Arkansas, won a game that they committed 5 errors in. And they still win the game, even after falling behind in extra innings, even after blowing a 4-run lead. It was dramatic. It was dedicated to the coach. And I thought, that's the kind of win that a World Series team would look back on and say, you know what? We can make an error. We can make a mistake. We can fall behind, and we can still beat number 1. So a big confidence boost. And you saw the Dogs ride that confidence into Truist last night, beat Georgia Tech again. And Tech, this is Tech's best team in I don't know however many years. And Georgia's able to knock them out at Truist last night. So tons of momentum for the Dogs. They'll be going to Vanderbilt this weekend. Tough place to play. Dogs be looking to take 2 out of 3. They should win every series left. This looks like a World Series team. It looks like a team that will once again host regional, super regional, and they will be in the hunt to be one of the 8 teams in Omaha, Nebraska at the end of the year.
And I'll tell you this, I mean, I love the Masters, and I was so into that on Sunday, one of the thrilling final rounds that event's ever had. But while the Diamond Dawgs were in the extra innings with Arkansas, I was as into that as I was the golf. I mean, we had a great Sunday afternoon. The weather was nice. I would kind of sit outside and watch and enjoy some of these sports. And, Diamond Dawgs for me were just as thrilling as Rory on Sunday. I just think this is a really fun and special team right now. They did not play a perfect game on Sunday by a long shot, but after getting blasted on Friday, to come back and win the next 2, and obviously take the only in-state rival game this year against Georgia Tech. Now, going on the road in the SEC is never easy. We found that out in Austin the other day, and obviously, Vandy's, oftentimes, tough on the road too. SEC play doesn't get any easier, but this is a Georgia team that's passed every test thus far. Mike, I appreciate your thoughts on that, and we'll look forward to chatting with you coming up in the days to come. And by the way, I look forward to seeing the DawgNation cruise next week too.
Oh, man, it's going to be a lot of fun, Brandon. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
By the way, while we're complaining about ESPN, how about no television coverage for Georgia and Georgia Tech last night? You had, $15,000 probably at Truist Park for this. We stay very disciplined around here. One of the things that we do is we talk about, we sort of keep the main thing in terms of our commentary. But what goes on with college baseball and the fact that there is such a grassroots, sort of ground level support for that sport that does not seem to be appreciated very much by those that could appreciate it. Boy, we could talk about that. Maybe one of these days we will. But college baseball clearly deserves better than it gets. Very, very interesting indeed that a sport like this that has honest-to-goodness, genuine – now, it's not huge numbers, right? There aren't millions and millions of college baseball fans necessarily. But if you've been to Foley Field, or if you go up to Nashville this weekend, or if you were at Truist Park last night, there's a very passionate following. And in most cases, you would assume somebody would look at this and say, hey, how do we cultivate this even more? How do we make this following even bigger? Whatever reason, it seems like there are a lot of people that sort of like college baseball at the size that it is now, almost as if they hope it doesn't get any bigger. Sometimes it sort of feels that way. But nonetheless, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. As I mentioned with Mike, next week, it all goes down. The DawgNation Cruise. And what an experience that's going to be. And obviously, I wish every single one of you could be on our DawgNation Cruise with us. I do, truly do. And hopefully in a future year, you'll get your chance to do that. But if you can't, you need to have your own next best experience with your own Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation sometime in 2025. And listen, I talked to people just this week who they just, kind of for the first time were on a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation, and they came away saying, BA, there is nothing like Perfect Day Coco-Cay. And I'm just telling you, there really isn't. What this is, and many of you know this, but if you've never been on a cruise, so when you go on a cruise, obviously the ship is one of the main draws, but the ship does go places. We call them ports of call, destinations, if you want to say it that way. And Royal Caribbean, in addition to sort of the regular ports, they also have their own private destinations, or in this case, Perfect Day Coco-Cay is a private island. It's like right in the middle of the Bahamas. The only way you can get there is on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And when you get there, it's like this unbelievable enclave. You've got the Thrill Water Park, tallest water slide in North America. You've got the chill side of the island, where if you want to kind of relax and just sort of enjoy that. You've got Hideaway Beach, which is sort of an adults-only type thing, kind of like being like a Vegas pool party. Now, how surreal is this? You're in the middle of the Caribbean, island, the Bahamas, and you're kind of like just sort of jamming out there with the Hideaway Beach party day. All of this is amazing. You can rent a cabana, you can enjoy great food. There's just so many awesome things. Obviously, plenty of beverages. And Jessica Slater's wonderful travel agent. She can tell you more about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can get you booked up on everything you need for a terrific Royal Caribbean cruise vacation sometime here in 2025. Okay, so transfer portal is open. As we've been telling you throughout the day, the news for Georgia right now is that Branson Robinson is in there. We wish him well on his way to his next stop and hope that he can get some health. Really do. I mean, you can't blame a player for injuries. Branson's dealt with his, but as a healthy player, I think he has a chance to still achieve a lot. And frankly, I like it when football players achieve their dreams. So I hope that's true for Branson Robinson here along the way. We're also on guard for who Georgia might bring in. A name that we mentioned yesterday is Jaden Ott, the former running back from Cal. We now know where Ott is going. Ott's going to Oklahoma. And so this to me gets a little bit interesting. And I think one of the things you're starting to see here, and this is one of the things I think we can maybe expect to see a little bit more of the next few days. In the NFL, there's not a huge correlation between big portal spending and success on the field. Oftentimes your win-loss record improves when you're the biggest spender, but some of that's because you were just the worst team a year ago. That's typically who spends big. But we don't often see, and frankly very rarely have, the biggest free agent spending team also win a playoff game in that given year. In fact, I think it's only happened once, like the last 7 or 8 years. And so I think we're seeing a version of that show up in college football right now where, hey, who's spending the biggest right now? Oh, it's perhaps some of the teams that are the most desperate. For instance, Oklahoma, and I'm not trying to trash this, but Oklahoma spends big dollars on bringing in the quarterback from Washington State. They also bring in his offensive coordinator. For some reason, I always butcher that guy's name, and I apologize. You bring in the Wazoo quarterback and his offensive coordinator, and now you're bringing in Jaden Ott too. And all of a sudden, for an Oklahoma team that's got Brent Venables kind of managing the defense, has had its issues on offense, so much so that they lost Jackson Arnold off the roster a year ago. Well, now you got the Wazoo quarterback, and you got the former Cal running back. And you're like, wow, that's a couple of nice offensive pieces. You'll also remember they hired Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl as their new general manager. There was a lot of this in college ball over the offseason where teams that have shaky coaches whose future is not certain, brought in general managers kind of outside the boundaries of the coach. In other words, there were several coaches this past offseason that had really very little say in the GM their program hired. If you're on shaky ground with your own job tenure, you probably weren't getting to pick your GM. The GM was coming in to maybe one day call you into the office for an uncomfortable conversation. I believe some of that's gone on at Oklahoma, but they are certainly putting some dollars here towards a chance to maybe save Brent Venable's job or at least keep the program afloat. Interesting to see Oklahoma be one of the first big splash teams from this portion of the portal window. We'll also be watching to see what's happening next for Nico Iamaleava, and I don't take pleasure in saying this, but it's fairly obvious here that Nico and his camp are such a gigantic loser from the decision they made last week. And in the national media, you've seen this kind of reported a lot as, there are no winners in this. I think sometimes people are afraid to say that the team won, the player lost. That the way in which college football is covered, certainly from a national perspective, is so pro-player. People are very afraid to be seen as anti-player in any form or fashion. It's just been kind of codified as the uncool position if you're in any way anti-player. And so people have a hard time calling balls and strikes in this sometimes. Tennessee won, Nico lost. Tennessee will take the money it was going to pay Nico, and they'll probably find a quarterback that I believe has a pretty good chance of being about as successful as Nico would be. It's not obvious now, unless Nico greatly reduces his price. It's not obvious right now where Nico is going. You may have seen this yesterday, that the one school that we mentioned being in the mix for this yesterday, Tulane, they are now no longer in the fold here for Nico. So you've got one of two things occurring. Maybe there's a private suitor for Nico that we don't know about. There's always a chance that's the case. Maybe Nico looks around and says, hey, I've got to swallow some pride. I've got to lower my price and just find somewhere to go, because at a different price, Nico obviously probably has a lot of value out there to somebody, but it's still a pretty late date to be bringing in a starting quarterback for the upcoming season. Just not very many teams are going to do that. Either way, whatever happens with Nico is going to be one of those things we're watching closely. And all the other transfer portal news, we'll kind of get into that as it comes out as well. But for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and such a thrill to get ready to say hello for the very first time in kind of a while to a guy who's been out there back playing professional football once again. It's our buddy Davin Bellamy here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pest Management. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, happy to have back on the program once again the terrific former Georgia linebacker, now back in professional football, which we love. It is Davin Bellamy of the DC Defenders, the UFL, joining us in the program. Davin, welcome back to the show. We're certainly glad to have you here.
Brandon, man, how's it going, man? I miss all the dog fans, and I miss jumping on, on Wednesdays here with you, man. So I'm glad to be back.
Well, I'm glad to be talking to you. And first of all, congratulations. We've been following your career. Obviously, it looks like the DC Defenders are off to a great start here this year. And I know for you, you had said many times that, hey, you were going to be playing somewhere for somebody here in 2025. So you stayed true to that promise. Since this is our first time speaking to you, since you have kind of gotten back in the league here, give us a little bit of an idea about how that's been going, what that process has been like.
Right, man. It's been going good, man. I kind of went to camp late to focus on a lot of the things I was doing, really outside of football, the construction, on here with you guys. So showing up late, allowing some of these young guys whose main focus is to get back to the league, 26, 27 years old. I'm at that age now of, where, I'm 30. So yeah. I'm just scratching my itch and looking to transition. But at the end of the day, we're starting off 3-0. I'm kind of trying to show the guys the championship way.
Yeah.
We came close 2 years ago. We had a down year last year. So kind of my role has changed more so than, having a lot of things on my back and, to go out there and perform versus just being here for the young guys and kind of being that extra coach on the field. So everything is going good, man. Right now we're 3-0 and we're just trying to keep the guys focused. And it's crazy because I hear myself saying a lot of the things that Kirby Smart says to us. So
that's awesome. Do you like being in that veteran role of being the guy that's kind of been around, that's sort of seen, this league, the NFL, obviously big-time college football, imparting some of that wisdom? Do you like being in that role? And how are these young guys as far as maybe wanting to follow your lead in some of this kind of stuff?
Man, I love it. I love it, man. I still can go out there and, get 10 sacks. But at the end of the day, is understanding what this league is and understanding your purpose at every point of life. Right now, kind of like I mentioned, I'm 30. These guys are 25, 26. I know where my mindset was when I was at that age. So just showing them, some of my moves, and then they go out there and get 2-3 sacks on them. And these are the same players I've been working with for 2-3 years. We've been in the same room, and we've made it to the championship game together. But now this year 3, I'm kind of liking this role of, let's get the guys going, because eventually I do want to get into coaching / general manager. So this is another way to stay close to the game, still scratch my itch, but still getting that thing of just pulling guys, along. We're doing a great job of that.
What was it like? Because this is the kind of thing I think a lot of people can relate to. When you didn't know quite when that phone was going to ring, you didn't quite know where you're going to be, but you were staying in good shape, you're working out, ready for that moment when it came. What was that process like for you? Because I would imagine that's not it's one thing if you know you're going to go to so-and-so training camp at a certain date. Okay, well, you're going to be ready for that. But being ready in the event, your name gets called, the phone gets dialed, that's a different level of commitment, a different level of discipline. What was that like for you?
Man, when I was going through this with the NFL, it was way more stressful. At that point, you have all your eggs in one basket, and it's football or nothing, and you're waiting for the call. You're not getting any checks in. But as you get older, you start to slowly see the writing on the wall. Any smart player would start to try to find life outside of football, and I started doing that 3-4 years ago. So, when it came time to me waiting for a call to come back here, this was a little different situation. I wanted to continue to focus on the things that I was focusing on outside of the, football, and allowing the young guys in camp to show their stuff. In my opinion, I thought it would be unfair for a 30-year-old guy who can still play at a very high level, but is not really trying to get back, to go and take away reps from younger guys who are trying to strike the iron while it's hot. So the reason why I stayed back from camp was to, one, focus more on the media side, and also focus more on my construction and giving these young guys who are playing very well now just that time in the summer to gain, their confidence. So I appreciate the DC Defenders for working with me and allowing me to continue to do what I do, off the field. And like I kind of told them, if you need me, call me. And they did that. So, it's a little different between this situation in the NFL. Now, waiting for a call in the NFL when, all your eggs in that one basket and no one's calling the phone, and that bank account is starting to get low, but the baby's still crying, so you got to, go get some milk. I don't have kids, but just the bill still got to be paid,
I get that. Hey, before we move on to a different topic, for a lot of people, they may not realize this, D.C., obviously in the Washington area, there's already an NFL franchise, but the D.C. Defenders have always had great fan support. For people who are familiar with UFL, they'll know that this is a fan base that seemingly always had a pretty unique connection with that team. Is that a fun experience to be a part of?
Yeah, man. It's not 90,000, in Sanford, but it's a good crowd for spring, football, and it just speaks about me wanting to return back to DC. I could have went to some of the other teams and had a bigger role, 30-plus plays a game, trying to go get 10 sacks again. But I feel like just the environment of DC, especially from a guy that went from Georgia, and I played professional football for 4 years. I'm used to playing in front of big crowds. So that gets me going, even though we're in the spring league, that we can still have 20,000, in the soccer field, and they're crazy. You got the beer snake, and it's a championship environment. Now, one thing that Coach Smart always told me that stuck out to me is, when you win, everyone wants to be, a part of the show. Yeah. And our first year here, we ran off 7 in a row, went to the championship game. And during this time, the Washington Commanders weren't where they are now. So we just got all that fan attraction, and they stuck with us. And I think, in my opinion, it's one of the best fans, in the league. So, it gets pretty rocky, man. You got a soccer stadium and all the fans are pretty close.
Kind of right on top of you. Yeah.
It's right on top of you. So even though it's not 90,000, man, you still get that adrenaline from the fans.
Well, speaking of Georgia, just coming off of G-Day this past Saturday, and now kind of turning the page to transfer portal is going to be open. That's obviously a little bit of a factor, but also just kind of getting prepared for fall camp and sort of using this time wisely in these warm weather months. You've been through this at Georgia. You've seen a preparation for what turned into a pretty magical season. How does Georgia best use its time post G-Day to make sure it's as ready as it can be for fall camp when that arrives?
Well, Brandon, man, it's a little different now, man. College football, as we see right now, is pro sport. So right now, I compared this time to the last preseason game. So the spring game is preseason game 3, and you kind of see what you got. You see what your 1s and 2s are going to be. You see what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then, but you also are trying to look to improve the team, knowing that some guys are going to leave. So I think the main focus at Georgia and for a lot of teams right now is keeping the players that you want to keep. With the transfer portal going to be booming right now, but just the culture that Georgia has, created and all the Coach Smart press conferences, we don't have a lot of guys on our roster, in my opinion, who I feel like are there for the money. They're there for the culture. So right now you're going to see a lot of guys get healthy. You're going to see a lot of guys work on the weaknesses that they showed in the spring game. And we was also, able to get a lot of our early transfers, some looks to see how they're going to be used. So right now you're kind of forming that, in the NFL, you call it the perfect 53, not the best 53, but the best fit, and right now that's what Georgia's going to do, especially get some guys back, healthy. And right now is very important to set the tone for the season. I know around this time, my senior year, right after the spring game, you're working out. And this is when I, decided to go, on the whiteboard and write out our schedule.
Yeah.
But, revenge tour. This is now where everything we do now is a national championship rep. We're not preparing for the spring game. We're preparing for week 1. And everything we do right now is a national championship rep.
Boy, I think that's a great story, Davin. I'm glad to hear you tell that. Obviously, one of the things we've always loved doing with you is kind of hearing those hot topics in college football. You always have provocative opinions on that sort of thing. The big thing this week has been, and we've talked about this a lot, is what's going on with the Tennessee quarterback, now former Tennessee quarterback, Nico Iamaleava. It seems like he's probably, at least the best guess we have right now, maybe misplayed his hand a little bit. Well paid for a guy that didn't have a great season a year ago, thought he could get more money. Tennessee calls his bluff, and now he's on the open market, hoping that someone's going to be there for him and give him a nice spot to land. It's definitely an interesting story, and I guess there's maybe plenty of villains to go around here depending on your perspective. But what do you make of, to the extent that you've been able to follow it, what has gone on with Nico over the course of the last few days, now out at Tennessee with a little bit of, uncertainty about where he might be going next?
Right, man, it's tough. And you have talked about this a long time last year, man, just about what we're afraid that this is going to turn into.
Yeah.
And sadly to say, it has turned into that. These guys have no loyalty to the team anymore. It's all loyalty to the bank account. And when you have a guy who thinks highly of himself like Nico, he's going to want more money. We've created this environment of free agency in college football, and this is the monster we've created.
Yeah.
I'm hearing reports like you got UNC, USC are starting to bark around. So it's going to be a lot of guys that are going to bet on themselves and lose. But we're in that time period where, let's just say, if the Ohio State wide receiver, number 4, who everyone is just talking about being the best wide receiver prospect since Julio Jones, where if he wants to go get $4 million, he's probably going to get his $4 million. I think right now most teams that can afford a $4 million quarterback already have their guy. So Nico is put in a spot where, he's getting the short end of the stick, but this is just the environment we've created in college football. And in my opinion, it's going to get worse because even in my opinion, this may not work for Nico, but if a player comes along and and has the popularity or like a Travis Hunter, he says, okay, I want $2 more million. Well, he's probably going to get his $2 more million. I applaud Tennessee for stepping up and just kind of slowing this thing down. And with it being an SEC school, it's the one that's saying there's no one bigger than the program. I think that's just beautiful.
No, I think that's really interesting. Davin, I love the conversation. I'm so glad to be back doing this with you again. We're super proud of you for continuing that football career, for being around this organization, and obviously help leading it towards a championship and kind of helping create that championship culture. And we know they're glad to have you too. So we'll look forward to our chance to speak to you soon. But thank you so much for being back on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management again today.
No doubt, man. You know it, man. Thank you, Brandon, and go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. All right, so a couple of things here because I want to keep this show from being like 17 hours long. But what Davin, and I've always liked Davin because he's a very business-minded football player. He's got business interests, things like that. He's a very business-minded football player. And what he just said about Nico, I think is so important. And this is, by the way, very true for people going to the portal here right now, which is like, I don't know that Nico was ever getting $4 million based on the way that he played. But as Davin says, just straight and to the point, you're not getting it right now. You know, the idea that the last minute before you kind of go into a few weeks before fall camp begins, that someone's going to give you $4 million now, that's just not how the timeline works. First of all, we throw these like $1 million figures around sports all the time, but $4 million is, no, I'm old fashioned, but $4 million is still a lot of money. And it takes, even for like the super rich programs, takes a little time to raise something like that. And if you're going to relinquish $4 million over to a player, boy, you got to have a lot of certainty that guy's going to be ready to go for you. And, the idea in a few weeks of fall camp, you're going to take a $4 million quarterback and get him ready to be your starter, assuming that you would go somewhere else. That's just not the way it works oftentimes. And so Davin, who, like I said before, is kind of a business-savvy football player, he's like, hey, the time to sort of strike for like the biggest bucks would have been at the beginning of the year. And apparently that's, I think Josh Pate has said they were considering holding out of the playoff game. But you know what? If you do that, good luck getting $4 million from anybody. People just don't want that headache. They just don't want that headache. Because here's the one thing that true professionals understand is that, yeah, money matters, of course, but there's also, oftentimes not an easy price tag to put on quality of life. And if you were literally worried from day to day what crazy thing your quarterback might do next, that's not much of a quality of life. So a lot of lessons to be learned here, I think, throughout all of this. I think that Davin was very good on that. It's just sort of very good to have Davin back on the program. I'll also mention this. In the time we've been on the air, you remember Nye Carr, the former Colquitt County Packer wide receiver, former Georgia commit, was kind of in the mix for Florida State for a while, ended up at Miami. Carr is now in the transfer portal here too. Oh, yeah, I guess he was, as I'm being reminded of, maybe wasn't the biggest fan of the Georgia offense on Twitter. Well, guess what? Nye Carr is now back on the open market. So we'll see where it goes next for Mr. Carr. But a lot going on there with the transfer portal and for the next few days here when it comes to all of that, too. Let me also give a shout-out to our friends at Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper's going to be on board Utopia the Seas next week for our DawgNation cruise. But you don't have to be in the Caribbean to enjoy the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. It's a pepper thing here for us on DawgNation Daily. It can be a pepper thing for you no matter what you're doing. I told you on Sunday I was just – listen, sometimes you're just glad to be home, and Sunday afternoon we had a chance to be home. And so sitting out on the back porch and watching some Masters and following some Georgia baseball and sipping on some Dr. Pepper, it was a great time. So as you're shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're picking up your groceries, make sure you do all of that too. Enjoy yourself some Dr. Pepper. We are so happy to have Dr. Pepper as a part of DawgNation Daily each and every week. We mentioned earlier the Diamond Dawgs. Very, very happy to see them get a win over Georgia Tech yesterday. They're at Truist Park, also raising some important money for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, which is a really important thing too. And our buddy Wyatt Fielden, who's always so eager to support his Diamond Dawgs, we're glad that he does, says Dogs winning the 404 on to the 615 here this weekend. And for the less cool or maybe the less area code educated, that's Nashville 615, 404 being Atlanta. Georgia's rolling and looking really good right now. It's fun to see. And listen, you go to Austin a couple of weekends ago. That's a reminder. Hey, it's going to be hard to win these games in SEC play. I don't believe the Vandy boys are going to certainly be a pushover this weekend easy, but Georgia kind of front-loading its work now to maybe put a little less pressure on themselves the sort of last part of the regular season. After last year, they had to kind of make that flurry at the end of the year to kind of be, in the position for the postseason. They're kind of front-loading some of that here this year now, so I think that is a pretty good thing. So Wyatt Fielding will give you another golden shoe for your continuous and worthwhile and justifiable support of the Diamond Dawgs. Lousy, stinking Gators. How about 1,621 days? That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We love all of that. We also love you, too. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Now, as we begin, I don't offer very many admonitions here on this show, but I do have to wag my finger. YouTube, what are y'all doing? Like I'm doing the show. Sometimes I'll have the comment section pulled up. Just want to see what people are talking about. Man, y'all are on here arguing about politics. Don't argue about politics on here. Now, listen, I pay attention to that stuff. I care about that stuff. I think to be alive in the world, I think one of the good ways to be a good citizen is to have a well-established worldview. I think it's important. I have values. I have things that matter to me. But people don't want to hear that in the YouTube chat. What are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? A lot of that today. So much so that I must wag my finger. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a minute. Matt Rukavine on the UFL. I mean, listen, the one thing that people I think always misunderstand is like it is still like football is still a game where it helps to be a grown man. So, obviously we see a lot of 18, 19-year-old guys doing very well in college, but for those of you who play like pickup basketball, sometimes if you're, you 19, 20, 21-year-old, you're facing some 29-year-old in pickup basketball. There's a little extra something or another that sometimes those guys can get. Garrison Tucker says the YouTube comments on DawgNation went down the drain a year ago. So how about that, Garrison Tucker? Very pointed criticism. So my only beef with YouTube is that if one person pops in, I don't think of G. Grace as a troll. G. Grace has been with us for a million years. I'll never say a bad word about G. Grace. But when like the sort of troll guy does pop up, says something, like 8,000 people attack the troll. And now the comment section, the chat to me becomes just sort of useless because I can't find like on-topic things to talk about. Now, what y'all say to each other is your business for the most part. If y'all want to get in here and rip on each other for politics, I'm not going to ban you for politics. The message boards will ban you. I'm not going to ban you for politics. It just makes it harder for me to find comments to read on the air. I just can't read them on the air. But like same thing with like when like 8,000 people attack the one troll. Well, it's like, well, now because like the people that watch the video after the fact, which is like most people, like they don't see the comments anyway. If you watch YouTube, I mean, I guess you can click to see the comments, but for the most part, people just sort of watch the show. And so therefore, the context around the chat kind of only exists for the live audience. Garrison Tucker says we need to do a Braves podcast. Listen, I'd love to. I would love to. Sometimes I kind of miss talking more about the other sports. You'll kind of hear me sprinkle in some other sports here every now and then. Now, listen, I love Georgia football. I've always said this. Until I die, God willing, as long as I have a voice, as long as I have health, I'd like to think in my 80s, once again, God willing, nothing guaranteed, I'd like to think in my 80s I'll still be doing a daily Georgia show on whatever like platforms the media looks like however many decades from now. It may even be like telepathically just sort of transported into your brain. I may not even have to speak the words. It may just be like, just telepathic transportation. But I will always do a Georgia show, God willing. I wouldn't mind doing some other stuff sometimes too. I wouldn't mind that. DT says the DawgNation chat's very civil. I would say that it is. I would say that the DawgNation chat is typically very civil. Typically very civil. I would say that's the case. UJ Marine says they also venture off to the comical at times, which I'm also fine with. Like Facebook, they're talking about food. Y'all are talking about, things. Like, I like that a lot. I want people to, people have made friends with people they've met on the show. Who knows? Maybe we've even had, love connections made because of the show. Maybe there's some of that that's out there. By the way, if there is, I want to officiate your wedding, if that ever happens. So I like the bond that listener/viewer forms with listener/viewer. But when it comes to like finding comments to read, we sort of have to keep those kind of in bounds because people just sort of want what they want. All right, let's see what's going on Facebook here for a moment. Which I'm also fine with. Josh Hobbs says, I'm listening at work today from a hot attic. I tell you this, when you're doing like construction work or something like that in an unair-conditioned space, attic, something like that, like that's real work. Like you're doing real work in a situation like that. So Josh, the fact that you let us keep you company while you're out there doing the good work, I certainly appreciate that. Lynn Shipman says Facebook is very civil too. We just talk about food a lot. Yeah, YouTube has always been a little more, rough, rugged, and raw. It's just always been a little more hand-to-hand comment. That's true. Johnny Prescott says, I'm working on Jeff Bezos to make you the first dog to podcast from space. So I have an interesting dilemma about this because I've always really liked, like I'm not a sci-fi person necessarily, but I do like space. And I also believe in space exploration. I believe in that as an idea. I do. So I've always liked space. Always. I love Star Wars. Not crazy into like sci-fi stuff, but I like stories that take place in space. I like Star Wars. I used to love I'm going to date myself here, but y'all remember the old Battlestar Galactica going back a long time ago? As a kid, that was amazing. Used to watch it on like the syndicated reruns. Used to love that. The new Battlestar Galactica wasn't too bad. That's pretty good too, I guess. I know it's got a huge cult following, as a lot of sci-fi stuff does. I like stories that take place in space. I was actually talking to my son about this the other day. I really like the idea of space travel. I like the idea that we would just hop in a spacecraft and go to a different planet. That seems really appealing to me. However, and I know celebrities just did this, I don't know that I would have the guts to actually go into space. I don't know that I would do that. Like, I like the idea of space travel, but on like Star Wars, they make space travel seem really comfortable. In real life, I think we've all known that space travel is not super comfortable. So this is one of those things where, like, I really, really believe in the mission of space exploration. I sort of like the romanticized idea of space that you see in the movies. But if it actually came time to sit in a spacecraft and go, and honestly, they barely even go to space. If we're being honest, what's her name? Katy Perry? Like, they barely even went to space. I mean, like, all they did was sort of get to where it's dark and they call that space. I don't know. Let me not say too much. But they're also probably braver than I am because I don't know that I would do that. UJ Marine likes Spaceballs. Very, very funny movie. No doubt about that. But I also am the kind of person that I can only tolerate so much Star Wars parody because, I mean, no joke, as a kid, I mean, Star Wars is basically like sacrosanct to me. So there's only so much Star Wars parody I can tolerate. Brian Whitaker says space fascinates me. It always has. Yeah, it does too. And we sometimes joke about like my like conspiratorial beliefs, things like that. The one thing I am not conspiratorial on at all is I don't believe in space aliens at all. I don't believe in UFOs. I don't believe in any of that. I don't think any of that is real at all. Now, I'm also not mad at you if you do. But, you know, we've seen like UFO talk. Boy, we are getting off the rails right now. But we've seen UFO talk kind of go mainstream in recent years. I don't believe in any of that. None of it at all. That's one of the things that I just don't believe in that. I think it'd be fun if it was true. Ooh, now Johnny Prescott also mentions, see, when I was a kid, the reruns that would be on like Saturday, that was always really fun. And I used to watch that Buck Rogers show. I believe Aaron Gray is who Johnny Prescott is referencing, I believe. Great show. Great show. There were like a couple of different like versions of it. It was like almost like different seasons. They sort of told different stories, it seems like. But that was a really fun show. Philip Jordan Wells says they went to the troposphere. I don't know what that means, but it's basically you just kind of get up where it's dark and all of a sudden, hey, we're in space. Philip Jordan Wells says, explain Roswell. So y'all aren't going to drag me off sides on this. You are not going to drag me off sides. Garrison Tucker says, I tried aerospace engineering, not the math I'm good at, but the brilliant minds that get us there are incredible. Yeah, I mean, I'm not very, I don't think of myself as a very smart person. I'm certainly not very educated. But when you do kind of meet someone like aerospace engineering, like you just realize, like that's a level of brilliance I could never even fathom. It's always joke, like if I went into like some sort of aerospace engineering college class, a little bit like a rodeo, could I last 8 seconds? Like could I listen to like 8 seconds of lecture before I'm like, I'm not even sure what anybody's even talking about right now? Because like when I was in school, math had numbers, but the kind of math they do, it's all just letters. There's no numbers. That's how far kind of out of bounds I am. It's like you go there and like the board, like 1, 2, 3, like numbers. There's no numbers on the board at all. It's all just like letters and squiggly lines. Like who knows how to do that? UJ Marine mentioned the movie The Martian. There's also the one with Sandra Bullock. I really like that movie. I like Interstellar, although that's a little bit complicated for me, but I still like it. But the one with Sandra Bullock where she's like trapped in space, that's what I'm afraid of. That would be awful. Awful. Kent Holcomb also mentioned like the weightlessness part of that too. I am very averse to like motion sickness, so that'd be tricky for me. Chris Slim White says we've gone to Mars today. Unfortunately, we probably have. All right, let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, do you think that Nico is an NFL guy, or do you think he should get all the money he can now because he'll not make a team? I mean, I certainly think that he is an NFL prospect, but, I mean, obviously, if he was eligible to be drafted now, I don't believe NFL teams would necessarily, be all that interested, but that's what college is sort of for. So, the very best players have the option of kind of double dipping. They can prepare for the NFL and make more money while also making some money in college. I don't think that Nico is some sort of deficient prospect that, would sort of only view college as his best way of making money. I think that there's a chance that Nico could be like 1-1. He could be the number 1 overall pick if he develops. But, he didn't play very much in 2023. Did not really play, I would say, all that well in 2024. And a lot of things change for you in year 3. And we'll never know. I mean, obviously, Georgia fans are glad of this because we don't like Tennessee. But from just a football standpoint, Nico will never be as good anywhere as he could have been at Tennessee in his 3rd year in the system. Now, he may still go be very, very good. And you might say, well, Tennessee will never be as good as it could have been with the quarterback that had been developing for the last 2 years. That may be true too. But boy, there's something really lost. There's just a overall quality of play erosion when a quarterback's like scrambling to go play for a team that he hasn't been a part of, and a team is scrambling to get a quarterback they haven't had. I trust the coach more than the player in that situation. Heupel to find a quarterback more so than Nico to find the coach that he needs. I mean, you really miss out. This is part of Gunner's value to Georgia. And I don't know how good Gunner Stockton is going to be. I've said before, I think he's probably, something in the middle of like the two, kind of disparate opinions. But part of Gunner's value to Georgia is he's also a guy that's been here for now, going on 4 years, knows the offense, knows the program, knows his way around the building. There's a level of confidence that comes with that. So, Gunner is more valuable at Georgia than Gunner would be on the open market. I sort of think Nico, who is a better athlete than Gunner Stockton, better prospect in the eyes of many, but Nico would be a better value to the Tennessee program than he would be to any program he might go to, because you've got to deal with the learning curve and the inexperience. Let's see what else. G. Grace also reminding us that when Heupel had success with Hendon Hooker, everybody talks about how old Stetson Bennett was, but Hendon Hooker was right about the same age, I guess. Let's see what else. So G. Gray says about Josh Heupel, what quarterback has he developed? Here's the thing, though. I think that's, in some respects, almost old-fashioned thinking. Like, I don't know how many teams are even selling quarterback development anymore. I mean, I guess Oregon is now with Dante Moore, but, they went from, like, Bo Nix to Dylan Gabriel. Like I don't think they were selling development. I think they were selling, hey, come here, we'll let you put up numbers, but you're sort of on your own to either be developed or have developed yourself. Miami goes from Cam Ward to Carson Beck. Like, some of these teams may just be in business for transfer quarterbacks. They're not really looking to develop. And after Heupel did put some time in on Nico, and Nico dipped on him, maybe Heupel's like, well, give me the 26-year-old Hendon Hooker from now on. Give me the guy who's a little bit desperate after playing in kind of a frustrating situation. Maybe I can get him to listen to me a little bit. I mean, I think that development is important, but that's not what the market values right now. And I'll tell you this, at least I don't think they should, nobody should pay $2 million for a guy to sit on the bench. That's just dumb. You got to find a way to get your money on the field. You can't have, in the NFL, we talk about like dead cap space, like dead money on the cap. If you got millions of dollars on the sideline that's too young to play, not ready to play, that's just dead cap money. And we mentioned this a moment ago about in the offseason, one of the trends we saw is there's a lot of teams hired head GMs where the coach didn't get a lot of input on that. I think one of the things that's going to determine if coaches can kind of have total control over their organization, which the good ones are all going to want, it's how much dead money do you subject your organization to? Because everybody kind of gets into like the recruiting battle and the ego thing of, I want this player, but mostly I don't want to lose to this other side here. So the price keeps going up and up and up and up. But there's got to be a point which you walk away. I mean, that's the thing that Heupel did with Nico. At this point, we are walking away. There has got to be a point in which you walk away from a negotiation. Now, you got to be careful. If you walk away from every negotiation, you don't have enough good players. But if you don't walk away and you just keep bidding and bidding and bidding, like there was this thing the other day where I like sports cards. I guess I think it was like 79 Wayne Gretzky or something like that. They got bid up to like $3 million. I think the guy ended up not paying for it. But it's like you can't just keep clicking bid. You can't. There's also a point at which you can't do that either. You just gotta sort of know. I mean, as the great Kenny Rogers once said, you gotta know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Good advice then, good advice still now. All right, we gotta get ready to go. Jeremy Arbin says, I believe that Georgia develops all its players. Now, I think that Georgia still sells development. I do. And I've heard others say this. I think it's probably right. It's probably a big difference between Georgia and Tennessee. Georgia sells development because it has developed. If you don't have a history of that, and listen, Tennessee was on rough terrain for a pretty long time. They were very desperate for players. And so they led with money. And, you know, if you lead with money, you may end up attracting players that just sort of want money. By the way, Scott Anderson mentions the Bama quarterback situation. We talked about Greg McElroy the other day saying that but he thought that Ty Simpson was the guy to beat. Honestly, that's what Kalen DeBoer has now said too, is that the guy who's been there, Simpson, is maybe the guy to beat. I still believe when it's all said and done, Austin Mack is the Alabama quarterback. I still believe that. But this may be kind of like an old school throwback to what like Nick Saban used to do with like Cooper Bateman and guys like that, where they may be just a little slow to want to turn the reins over. Brian Whitaker checking out. Brian, we are getting ready to do that too. Thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Let's see what else. Anything else on Facebook before we go? Yeah, Philip Jordan Wells says the troposphere is the top of the atmosphere. And, I mean, I think that a lot of the other space travel's kind of the same way. Like, I'm not sure that technically counts as space. All that's, like, to me, that's just really high in the air. I'm not sure that technically counts as space. The moon is space, which is a whole different topic for a different day. But that's space. Like, when you get to, like, other, like, celestial bodies, now that's space. Just because it's dark doesn't mean it's space. Let's see what else. Javarcy Bowles asking about Georgia players in the portal. So we did get the Branson Robinson news during the show earlier today. All right. Anything else? Let me go to DawgNation.com one more time. All right. Let's see what else. All right, we got to get ready to go. Good stuff as always. Appreciate it. Still having a little bit of an issue with my DawgNation.com comments. Kaylee was giving me a hard time the other day. Kaylee, I think what the issue is, I'm not signed in. I think that may be what the issue is. I'm only like looking at it. All right, but good stuff nonetheless. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. It's going to be warm. Spring is kind of here, which we love. But if you want to love it as much as you need to and can, you got to have that air conditioning unit tuned up to factory fresh spec. So find our friends at RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. They'll get you tuned up to factory fresh specs. They'll keep you cool and comfortable all spring and summer long. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Also have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.